Hello, everyone. My name is Lawrence Gowan of the rock band Stixx, and you are listening and watching the Brutally Delicious podcast.
Good to see you again.
You too. Okay.
It's been a long time.
Right, so we got Bruce and we got Chris.
Yeah. It's been a long time. You doing okay?
Fantastic. How about yourself?
I can't complain at all. You guys are on the road. Where are you at today?
We are in Boston. Hang on, I'll show you Boston.
Boston.
Yes, Boston.
Nice.
Boston. Nice.
Right across from the Boston Common, which is one of my favorite spots.
Oh, nice. How the
Boston
show's been
Common.
going?
Most successful summer tour we've ever had.
Really?
Like unbelievable. Way over the top. Yeah. Our manager keeps calling us going, I can't believe this is going the way it's going. And yet we kind of can believe it at the same time, because I think people have just been so hungry to get back to seeing shows, and we've got a great package this year with Loverboy and REO Speedwagon and Stixx, and each band is kind of at top form, so it's really, it's kind of exploded, is in the best possible sense of that word.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Who did you say you're out with again?
Loverboy.
Oh, my friend Jay is working with those guys.
Who is?
Jay.
Oh, fantastic.
Dakeman. Yeah.
Yep. So, they're our special guest, and then of course we have REO Speedwagon and Stixx with us, and so you get over 4 hours of like classic rock where people know every little note and every nuance of it, and it's amazing to hear just how worn out the audiences are by the time the last note gets there every night. 7 p.m. From 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. they're just like they can barely sit down.
That's awesome, dude. I was actually almost late for this interview because I was doing research for the interview, and I came across Stixx live in Tampa in February 2nd, and it was the whole set. And I was just like, holy shit. It's like an hour and a half long.
Yeah.
And you guys were just killing it for an hour and a half.
Well, I'm glad you found that. I'll go looking for that now too.
Yeah, you just have to Google Stixx Live 2022. It's the first thing that comes up.
Yeah, good.
But the thing that struck me when I was watching the video is your drummer is absolutely hammering the shit out of those drums. Like he doesn't hold back. And the other thing is that the entire band sings.
Yeah. Everyone, including Todd, our drummer. Yeah.
Like that's not something you really see anymore.
You don't, quite honestly. And it makes me feel bad for bands that only have one singer. It's great when you get various characters and various personalities appearing in the songs. What struck me was watching the Beatles get back a few months ago, was that they had the luxury of having 4 great and very individual lead, had a distinct character they brought to it, and then the blend of them singing together was, like
yeah. You could say it was classic.
It was perfect,
maybe.
is what it was, and the perfection. And I did feel that the same kind of thing, with the luck of having a band like Stixx with JY and with Tommy Shaw and with myself adding the lead vocals there. And then the blend of all of us is very, it has a lot of nuance of various characters that show up on any given night. And I'm glad you noticed that.
At first I was like, because like, I don't know about your age, but I know some of the guys in Stixx are like in their late 60s for sure. And I don't know about the drummer's age, but like, he's got a double kick set up, and he's just hammering the crap out of the drums.
Todd has got incredible everything, incredible dexterity, fortitude, the stamina, all of that. But on top of everything else is just an unbelievable. He's one of those drummers is actually a musician.
Nice.
There are a few on the planet, and he definitely qualifies. He's more of a musicologist, I think, than any of us in the band, and he can pinpoint uh, discrepancies in if there's anything to do with pitch or anything at all to do with how we're approaching a piece. He has more insights, than just I'm here to
Thing that
beat
really
my bongos.
stuck out to me is not only how much fun the audience is having, but you as your Stixx seems to be having like the best time they've ever had in their entire life.
I
And that blows me away because a lot of touring acts get things and,
Yeah.
but you're up there and it seems like it's like the best thing that's ever happened.
Well, I can tell you, I'm as entertained as the audience is when I look across the stage. I can see, it's a band of very extroverted performers. Let's put it that way. That are all very engaged within the band and with the audience in a really seamless way. So the whole thing becomes a very factor to it with the human connections that are going on thousands at a time are firing up all kinds of and I guess you'd call them endorphins or whatever it is, that we're all kind of in a euphoric state up there.
Yeah.
And the audience, and it's a very infectious thing. There's thousands of people with gigantic smiles on their faces and their arms in the air, and that's the greatest way to end a day, a show,
So,
anything in your
pardon me
life.
for saying this. I'm Canadian, and I knew about you long before I knew about Stixx.
I don't have to pardon you for saying you're Canadian.
Well, hey, I mean, it's a very Canadian thing to say. Excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm Canadian.
I'm sorry.
So I have to say this. Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry. But I knew about you long before I knew about Stixx, and you're an amazing singer. What's it like sharing the stage after being like as successful as you were in Canada as a songwriter and a singer? What's it like going from that to sharing the stage with multiple people that take lead vocals?
That is a deep question because it's funny. As a solo artist, I always preferred, and I have many favorite solo artists. I preferred the band dynamic because from everything we just discussed, there's the unpredictability of what happens when various characters get together and make music is part of the character of this entity that becomes a band. It's that is even beyond the sum of its parts. It has a whole spirit to it that has to survive, etc. So that sounds. I welcomed the opportunity of kind of working with others, and I began to kind of learn that. Funny enough, starting from about 1990, when I started co-writing with people, even on my solo records, and I liked the bringing in fresh, kind of unusual ideas and bouncing them off each other. And when I joined Stixx, I found, well, this is an environment where this happens all the time. It doesn't mean there aren't multiple frustrations that could come along with that, because we're human and we think we're going in one direction, and then the next thing you know, we're heading in another, and we have to deal with unpredictable elements that come in. But eventually they lead you, if you trust the people that you're with and if they have trust in you, they're going to lead you to something that's really beyond what anyone as an individual could bring up. So a prime example, I guess I'm going to have to bring this up, is that the title track of the new record, Crash of the Crown, it features 3 lead singers. It starts with JY, then it goes to Tommy, then Tommy and myself, and then I take over on the end. And just the arc of that song runs through such a gamut of characters, personalities, and camera angles, so to speak, that it's exciting. It's more exciting than just holding the whole thing yourself.
It was very cool. See, I always just wondered about that because you were a larger than life star in the Canadian music scene. So it's like, how do you go from that to being in a band, and it seems like it was just kind of a natural evolution. Like,
To be honest, I really enjoy both. And the other night when we played in Toronto, the only Canadian show on this tour, we played a Criminal Mind, and so I got to do both. You know what I mean?
yeah.
That's my own persona. My own musical characters there. But again, it's shared by a band that have a different take on it, and so I'm in a very, very fortunate place because I guess I'm almost like a reverse Phil Collins in a way, where he had the band, became the lead singer of the band, and then had a solo career. Mine is the exact opposite of that. It was like this. I had a band.
Yeah.
It didn't go anywhere. It didn't make records. A solo artist, worked on everything myself, then started working with other people more and more, even on the writing part of it, and then joined a band, and now find myself I've lived long enough to balance between the two.
I like how you say reverse Phil Collins, because he lived in Vancouver for a while. You lived in Toronto. It's like it's the opposite.
We're actually maybe we're parallel universe people. I saw Genesis. It was the first show back after the thing that happened in 2020. There's this thing. Anyway, just fantastic. When I saw him on stage, I saw Genesis. First of all, they were playing as good, maybe better than I've ever seen them. And the way the heartbreaking thing, of course, of noticing that he can't get on the drum kit,
Right.
but the poetic weight of his son sitting behind him, nailing the parts, just phenomenal. Nick Collins played, and Phil himself having these great lyrics and his storytelling capabilities, all within a band, and still being able to convey that and to project that it was very weird. I was reluctant to go to the show because I knew he wouldn't be playing the drums. I left thinking that might have been the best Genesis show I ever saw.
Oh, wow.
So it's pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Genesis was a little before my time, but I watched a VH1 behind the music, where they go and they look at the record, how it was made and stuff, and the history of the band. And I was just like an instant convert. I just couldn't believe how good they were.
That's it. You can't believe that they're the closest thing, I think, in a lot of ways to a Beatles story, where you've got. Can you imagine if, take for example, they had that cataclysmic thing that happened when Peter Gabriel left the band, right?
Yeah.
And I remember even at the time thinking, well, I'm just going to follow Peter Gabriel's career, which of course I did. He actually wound up becoming my favorite solo artist. But then the idea that the drummer, whose name I barely knew at that point, I knew, I think he sang one song on, I think, Selling in England by the Pound. And I noticed, great drummer, but I didn't know he had that kind of capacity. And each player is the idea that they all met. Just the idea that those people, all four of them, all met at school. And then the next guy that comes in is Phil Collins. It's a pretty phenomenal story. It's funny, Todd and I, you talk about our drummer, we try to think of the equivalent of that in other bands. And we like to say, imagine if at the height of U2's career, if Bono left the band and Larry Mullen became the lead singer, that's as shocking. And the band ended up being more successful, not less.
Yeah.
That would be the only equivalent we can think of, really, that would equal that for phenomenal occurrence.
That was the thing about that documentary too, is that they were like, when they decided to make Phil the singer, the label was like, yeah, you guys are done. Like, we don't want, no.
Labels, they always know.
Yeah.
Right. I was lucky enough to see Genesis at Madison Square Garden on the Abacab tour. I don't know.
Oh, you lucky man.
83-ish or something.
Yep. I saw that at Maple Leaf Gardens. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was back in
Maple Leaf Gardens.
Yeah, right at their height. Absolutely. 83 is probably the pinnacle. Yeah.
What is a
Man, Maple Leaf Gardens, you're making me feel nostalgic here.
That's okay. You're just a kid. We're trying to tell you about all the great things that happened before.
What does the Stixx audience look like now? I imagine you've got multi generations, right? Because you got people like me bringing their kids to a great summer show.
When we come off stage just about every night now, and this started in, believe it or not, about 12 years ago, but it's become more and more ingrained. The audience is skewing younger, not older. And we looked out at the audience just the other night. We played, well, the last 2 nights we played in, we're in Boston tonight, last night, Saratoga Springs. The night before that was Toronto. And we look out at the audience, we see it's the age range goes from about 10 years old to people in their 70s. And they all seem to be just as enamored with it and have personalized the songs. The ones on any given night, half the audience is under 40. So they weren't even born when the biggest classic rock records were made. And yet they have embraced these songs to the same degree as if they're concurrent with their lives. And sorry to go back one step. Same thing happened at the Genesis show when I was there. Same thing happened at the last show I saw before the break was Elton John. And behind me was a row of young people who weren't even 20 singing every word to those songs. So we see that from the stage at Stixx shows. I played some Gowan shows actually, since of course you're Canadian, you'll understand that. I played a few on a break that we had at the end of June. And it was the same thing during those shows. I look out and I see people that were not even born when Strange Animal or Great Dirty World or those albums came out in the 80s, and yet they have embraced them and they're part of their lives. So that's been I think the greatest surprise that's come along in my life in musical life is to see that.
Yeah, I imagine.
The iconic music journalist Alan Cross just put out an article about this very phenomenon. And yeah, and I can't remember the title. Does new music suck or something like that? And he analyzed streaming platforms.
Yeah.
And the songs that perform the best are all done by older bands. Like all the classics are the biggest provider of music revenue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the new music doesn't get nearly as much.
For example, well, I don't know why that is, but I have a few theories, but they may not be all that relevant. The new movie Nope, N-O-P, that Jordan Peele's new film, and it went to #1 box office. I went to see it because one of the main songs in the song that he used for the trailer was Strange Animal.
Oh, wow.
And in the middle of the movie, the Corey Hart song comes on, and and then I you get all the tracking things and notice that Strange Animal across Canadian radio went from about 50 plays a month earlier to just under 500 plays, so over tenfold just a couple of weeks after that movie came out. So it connects with people, is what I'm saying, And again, when I went and saw the movie, it's primarily a younger audience that was at the film, and yeah, I can tell they hear it. It stays with them melodically. Something's going on, or lyrically, there's something they can relate to right away, and I think those are a couple of the great features of the rock era. After all, and Alan probably pointed this out in his article, I say this all the time, rock music is the great musical statement of the last half of the 20th century. It's indisputable.
Yeah.
The first half, you could say, was defined by jazz because it influenced all the music that came before it. Classical music was suddenly so influenced by Gershwin and all great, Louis Armstrong, great jazz artists influenced all of that. But the moment electricity gets introduced and rock music starts in the 1950s, right to the present day, that is the monolithic musical statement. And so it's as legitimate as any other musical era in history. So why wouldn't it's amazing that we're so surprised by this, that it has connected so well with people. There were probably people, I'm going to guess, in the mid 1800s, there were probably people going, this new Tchaikovsky stuff it's really good and I like it, but the Beethoven stuff, I can't get enough of it. Meanwhile, Beethoven died like 25 years prior to that. Then probably by 1900. they were listening to like Stravinsky or something, and then going, I like Stravinsky, but that Tchaikovsky stuff is killer, right?
Yeah.
You go ahead, and it's probably like that in 50-year type chunks.
Yeah.
And sure enough, you get young bands that go, man, I love Royal Blood, which I do, by the way.
Yeah.
But Led Zeppelin, have you heard those guys? You know, so I just think that I think it's a natural occurrence in music, quite frankly.
So here's a funny story here, and non-related, but kind of. I'm in the car, and Dire Maker comes on, and I'm like, oh, I gotta crank this up, and I'm like, one of the best songs of all time, right? Probably one of the best drum beats ever written in rock music. And I crank it up, and my wife's like, oh, I really like this. And then Robert Plant starts singing, and she's like, this guy's a terrible singer. What band is this? I'm like, I got to stop the car, and you got to get out.
Right.
We can't have this conversation.
Some songs, you have to acquire you have to acquire a taste for how he sang those songs. That's part of his charm, you know, is that some of them are more throwaway, and then others are much more intimate, you know, All of My Love and all those types of songs. But yeah, I you know what, I'd stay with her for a few more years and see if things might improve.
I think it's interesting you
Wouldn't
mentioned.
give up on it yet.
Oh yeah.
She got good taste in some areas.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned that Nope sort of brought that song back to the forefront again. The same thing happened with like Stranger Things, right? Brought that whole Metallica. All of a sudden, everybody's like, "Hey, you know who Metallica is?"
Kate Bush, yeah,
Kate Bush as well, right?
Yeah.
Really weird.
Very much so. It's weird. I think to us, maybe not so much to Chris, but it's weird to us, and it shouldn't be. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
It sounds unusual, and yet it shouldn't be. The songs had a great effect on our lives when we first heard them, and why wouldn't they be able to translate that to further down the road if the songs really had something really of substance at their core? I think that's part of what people find frustrating about some, I'm going to really qualify and say some new music, and sometimes it's the stuff that gets the most attention briefly. A lot of new music is very tied to, this got to be careful here, but so much of it can be tied to the personality and the cult of the personality, I guess, of the person who's singing it. And that begins to kind of mire in some ways, whether it's any good or not. Whereas you had to really dig to find out who, and that's because we advertise so effectively now with the internet, et cetera. It's so ubiquitous. It's so, ever present. Whereas you had to kind of dig and find artists and I would go to concerts of bands that I didn't even know what they looked like, back when they first came out. I didn't know what Led Zeppelin looked like. You tell me after the fourth album, I still haven't seen a picture of these guys. And everybody's going to the show, So that tells you that the music had something extremely powerful that was motivating people. And I think there's still music around that does that. There absolutely is, because I'm so many new acts right now, but too often they kind of have to live in the shadows for a little while before people dig
with a band like
rock.
Stixx and Led Zeppelin and all these bands. Do you think a part of why people kind of are gravitating more towards that now, even the younger generation, is that the recordings were actually recordings of bands, and they're not so overproduced?
Yes, I do. That's a really thick subject, but we noticed that part of the phenomenon of the digital, revolution in music and in our lives has brought so much great stuff with it. But like every great invention throughout history, it does something great and it does something terrible. They all do. The automobile, what a fantastic thing it is, and it's poisoning the planet. So anyway, Still got them. So
Yeah.
with I'm going to bring up the fact that the last two Stixx records we made, which were really successful. I mean, Crash to the Ground went to #1 on Billboard's rock album chart. They have a separate chart for that now. But with the Mission and Crash to the Ground, we realized the whole digital world doesn't really jive well with the sound of classic rock. Therefore, we have to we have to find studios that have the analog gear that we can record as if it's 1978, 79 again. Put down our phones, not not have our day distracted by all the digital wonders that make can fill out your entire day now, and instead lock eyeballs and fingers and all the ideas with just each other in this room and record it to tape. And there's even a nuance to even smelling tape on it.
Oh yeah.
I know it's weird to say.
No, tape has a smell. It definitely does.
A whole tactile thing that kicks in, and it's your sensory experience. We wound up making those two albums, The Mission and Crash to the Ground, where they sound and they feel like classic rock records that were concurrent with the classic records of Stixx. And that's how we felt, and that's how the majority of the responses that we've had from them have been.
It's one of the first things I noticed when I was listening to that single,
Yeah.
Crash the Crown. I was just like, oh my God, this sounds analog.
Now that doesn't mean that we don't use some digital technology for things like editing, for things like putting things together in Pro Tools, and it's all those types of things. It's just that we didn't start from that. That wasn't the starting point. The starting point was to make it feel like we're recording it in that era.
And I think in the end, it makes it more organic, right?
100%. Everything about it has. There are little, like what you're saying about Dire Maker. There are little things in there that are actually mistakes, or were unintentional, that you could fix in a digital world, but you can't quite fix perfectly in an analog world. And that's part of the charm of what comes through on a record. And then you begin to kind of arbitrarily choose, what may be not technically perfect and yet has the right vibe that gets in the door. And then you choose between that and something that may be technically right on the mark, but doesn't have the same mojo, so to speak. And that equation goes through thousands of times in every single song. And eventually you end up with something that sounds the way that those records sound like.
How hard was it finding a studio to record on tape?
I have a great studio with a partner in Toronto, and I bought an old 2-inch machine, a Studer machine years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Which Studer?
Studer A800, A8.
Oh my God.
And then
the 880.
And then I have the A800 that we mixed to, or it's the other way. One of them's an
Yeah.
So we mixed to that, and then of course in Nashville, there's great studios that have all that gear. We recorded all of the Mission at Blackbird, which is a studio.
Yeah,
all that
beautiful.
And all the engineers that still know how to fix it. That's the tough part. Is when it busts. Who here knows how to put this back together?
And finding the parts is
no.
probably
I worked on tape as an engineer.
Next to impossible.
Yeah, I worked as an engineer on tape from like 98 to 2002, somewhere in that vicinity. And man, there's so much that goes in to making sure that the tape is even just ready to go. You don't just throw it on the machine and hit record.
You notice I mentioned about editing. We go to digital. That's because, the amount of blood that is spilled with the razor blades that have to keep cutting tape. It's not right.
Yeah.
There's this meme that goes around, and it's this old man, and he's like this, and it says, back in my day, and I made one that says, back in my day, razor blades and alcohol meant we were recording to tape.
That's right. That's right. Alcohol to clean the heads.
Yeah.
And then, of course, to drink. And the razor blades were to clean tape.
Hey, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but we're down to 3 minutes in this Zoom. We got the timer on this thing.
What?
Yeah. Oh, man.
I so
Well,
appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so
We're locked up.
Thanks so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure to have you on. And as a Canadian, I'm a lifelong fan, and I'll never forget some of my.
That's good.
It's up to you on, and I really appreciate.
Play
you
that
being
one
here
for
with us.
your wife, and hopefully she's thinks I'm.
Well,
Hopefully she'll think I'm as bad as Robert Plant. So I wound up going to a doctor here that gave me a couple of at Harvard. He's back. He's back. He gave me some exercises that were really good for anything to do with the tendonitis or nerves or all these things in your hand. One is that try not to keep your elbows bent too long in the day, because that can begin to kind of tighten everything up. And I can go into medically why. Try not to use arm rests too much, because again, they can begin to kind of squish things. The other thing is just generally trying to do stretching type exercises, things that kind of bring them out. And then don't play any longer than, say, 25 minutes to half an hour without taking some kind of a break to let your hands, basically recalibrate is basically how what it comes down to. I have to also say, though, there's luck involved, though, too, Chris. I mean, genetically, if you're lucky enough not to have that as a predisposition, you're very fortunate. But knowing the fact that it happens and you need to do something about it is probably, I would say, that's the first step in figuring out the various. Sorry, I can't turn these bloody notifications off.
That's okay. No, I was just watching your piano solo live, and I was just like, okay, how does someone that can play like that, and you've been playing at that high level probably since you were 12, how do you keep yourself from without injury? And it's interesting.
It is. Sports can do all kinds of damage, so I don't play hockey to the same, anymore.
Right.
I ride a bike now. Even when I'm riding the bike, try not to grip too hard, like try to keep my fingers open.
Yeah.
It's on your mind. I have to say it is on your mind of like, how could this have a negative impact on what I need to do with my hands? When I'm playing that piece you're talking about, key dive, even during that piece, you'll see I take quick little breaks where I just go like that, like just
Yeah.
So there are little things that can kind of help along the way. I'm sure people will find this fascinating.
Lawrence, I thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. It's always a pleasure to talk to one of my Canadian heroes.
My pleasure, guys. Great chatting with you.
I appreciate you always coming on.
All the best, and we'll see you up the road soon.
You got it, man.
Be well, my friend.
Thank you, Bruce. Good to see you.
Cheers. Be safe.
Have a good tour.
You
All right.
too.
Bye.
See ya. Bye.